Asian American is a label that people have strong feelings about, whether it is part of an identity that they hold for themselves or whether they feel like it doesn't apply to them. And I'll say that my father immigrated here in the 80s, and he tells me all the time that he doesn't think that the label Asian is useful. Whereas I actually see that as my primary racial identity, if I'm asked. And so I think this really comes from the fact that when we think about this category, we have to hold two things at the same time. And the first is that the label does apply to a really heterogeneous population. And we can understand that the experiences of people of Asian background who arrive in the US with very high levels of education and wealth are not the same as people who arrive with very little of either, or that those who migrate voluntarily have different experiences from those who are displaced by violence and war, which is the case for many Asians in the United States, or that those who are new immigrants here have very different experiences from those who have been in the US for generations, right? So that's one of the aspects of this category is the heterogeneity. We can also understand that there is something to be gained for thinking about what we do have in common with one another. And this gets back to what I was saying earlier about Asian American studies, ethnic studies growing out of the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s, right? So people of Asian descent have been in the US and the Americas for a very long time, but this idea that Asian Americans was a cohesive group, it wasn't just Japanese or Chinese or Indian, et cetera, but that this was actually a group, that idea is relatively new. And it really grew out of a way of consolidating political power among groups that on their own had very little because of their relatively small size. And it grew also out of solidarity with other people of color, Black, Chicano, and Indigenous organizers, with the idea that all of these groups were suffering under white supremacy and US imperialism. And so that's where this idea really comes from, is rooted in. And I think holding on to that history is what can help us think about what we do have in common with each other, even when we do have diverse experiences and differences that we can respect, very much so, but what can be gained out of creating power together as a group that we feel in solidarity not only amongst ourselves, but with other groups of color.